and dangerous. It doesn't serve America's economic or social interests, and it undermines respect for the rule of law and for our democratic institutions. Fundamental reform is both badly needed and long overdue. That's why I support immigration reform, and it's also why I initially joined a bipartisan group of senators to try to find common ground on this issue. But it's also why I left that group, and it's why today I must oppose the so-called Gang of Eight immigration bill. At the outset of this debate, the gang promised a grand immigration bargain, strict border security in exchange for a pathway to citizenship for approximately 11 million illegal immigrants already here. Even before the bill was introduced, gang members distributed talking points that lauded the bill's beefed-up security provisions, new visa reforms, and measures that would make the pathway to citizenship, quote, long and tough. But once the gang produced actual legislation, and once senators, the media, and members of the public began to read the bill, it was clear that the talking points did not reflect the reality of the legislation itself. After pointing out glaring discrepancies between claims about the bill and the actual text, senators were told that they would have an opportunity to make changes during the Judiciary Committee's markup. But the four gang members on the committee banded together as a bloc with Democrats to defeat virtually all substantive amendments proposed to improve the bill. Congressional approval of the border security plan? No. Improve interior enforcement and strengthen workplace verification? Rejected. Manage the flow of new legal immigrants? Failed. Limit access to some of America's most generous welfare programs? Blocked. As a result, the bill that will come to the Senate floor this week is essentially the same huge, complex, unpredictable, expensive, and special interest-driven big government boondoggle it was when it first came to the committee. The bill does not secure the border. It doesn't build a fence. It doesn't create a workable biometric entry-exit system for immigrants to this country. What standards and benchmarks it does set, the bill simultaneously grants the Secretary of Homeland Security broad discretion to waive. It will, however, immediately legalize millions of currently illegal immigrants, make them eligible for government services, and put them on a pathway to citizenship. Many critics compare the gang bill to the failed 1986 immigration law, which, like this one, also promised border security in exchange for amnesty, but did not deliver its promises. But the gang bill actually reminds me of a more recent piece of legislation, Obamacare. Like the president's health care law, the gang bill was negotiated in secret by insiders and special interests, who then essentially offered it to Congress as a single take-it-or-leave-it proposition. It grants broad new powers to the same executive branch that today is mired in scandal for incompetence and abuse of power. Total cost estimates are in the trillions, according to some. And rather than fix our current immigration problems, the bill makes many of them worse. However well-intentioned, the Gang of Eight bill is just an immigration version of Obamacare. That's why true immigration reform must be pursued on a step-by-step basis, with individual reform measures implemented and verified in the proper sequence. Now, happily for immigration reformers like me, this appears to be the approach being pursued in the House of Representatives. It's the only one that makes sense. First, let's secure the border. Let's set up a workable entry-exit system and create a reliable employment verification system, one that protects immigrants, citizens, and businesses alike from bureaucratic mistakes. Then let's fix our legal immigration system to make sure we're letting in the immigrants our economy needs and the numbers that make sense for our country. Once these and other tasks, which are plenty big in and of themselves, are completed to the satisfaction of the American people, then we can address the needs of current undocumented workers with justice, compassion, and sensitivity. Since the beginning of this year, more than 40 immigration-related bills have been introduced in Congress between the House and the Senate. By a rough count, I could support more than half of them, 8 of which have Republican and Democratic co-sponsors. We should not risk forward progress on these other bipartisan reforms just because we're unable to iron out each of the more contentious issues. The Gang of 8 bill is not immigration reform. It is big government dysfunction. It is an immigration version of Obamacare. All advocates of true immigration reform, advocates on both the left and the right side of the aisle, should therefore oppose it. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
And here in the Senate in a quorum call, waiting for senators to come to the floor. Continuing debate on the immigration bill, whether to bring the bill to the floor for amendments, possible passage. A vote is scheduled tomorrow to limit debate on the immigration bill. And later today, they're going to set aside immigration to take up the farm bill at 5 o'clock Eastern Time. At 5:30, 2 votes scheduled, one on an amendment to the farm bill, the other possible final passage. And if approved, that farm bill will go to the House. It authorizes agriculture and food aid programs for another 5 years. And at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, the Senate will swear in New Jersey State Attorney General Jeffrey Chiesa. He's going to be taking the seat of the late Senator Frank Lautenberg. On the other side of the Capitol today, a brief meeting of the House for a pro forma session. And this week in the House, work on the 2014 Defense Department authorization and requiring new rules for international financial derivatives and swaps. And in a quorum call, waiting for a senator to take the floor, continuing debate on the immigration bill. Later today, setting aside immigration, taking up the farm bill at 5 o'clock, about 2 hours from now, Eastern Time. And at 5:30, 2 votes scheduled, one on an amendment to the farm bill and the other possible final passage. At 4:30, the Senate will be swearing in New Jersey State Attorney General Jeffrey Chiesa. He's going to be taking the seat of the late Senator Frank Lautenberg. And in the House, brief pro forma session today. They'll be in for legislative work tomorrow and work later this week on the 2014 Defense Department authorization and requiring new rules for international financial derivatives. You can watch that debate this week from the House floor on our companion network, C-SPAN. I'm going to take a look at some of the tweets coming from members of Congress.
Mr. President,
Deputy Majority Leader.
ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I have one unanimous consent request for a committee to meet during today's session of the Senate. It has the approval of the majority and minority leaders, and I ask consent this request be agreed to and printed in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent that Emily Sharp, Michael Branson, Mike Oliar, Teresa Bloom, fellows from the Senate Budget Committee, be granted floor privileges during the consideration of S-744.
Without objection, so ordered.
I request unanimous consent that fellows in Senator Blumenthal's office, Afton Sissel and Sean Aronson, be granted floor privileges for the duration of the debate on S-744.
Without objection, so ordered.
So, Mr. President, this week we begin an historic debate. For the first time in 25 years, we will actively debate the comprehensive reform of America's immigration laws. I'll be the first to admit that I come to this debate with a prejudice, with a bias. Like many Americans, I am the child of an immigrant. In 1911, 102 years ago, my grandmother came to this country with 3 little children. One of those children was my mother. She was 2 years old when she arrived in America in Baltimore. Now, my grandmother didn't speak a word of English, but somehow she managed to get my mom and my aunt and uncle on a train, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad train, to St. Louis, Missouri. They were on their way, actually, to East St. Louis, Illinois, to meet my grandfather. Just one floor away, a few steps away, is my desk for the Majority Whip office. Behind my desk is a naturalization certificate from my mother. I keep it as a reminder of who I am and where I came from, and the fact that the Durbin family, and in her case, the Kutkaita family, were immigrants to this country. I'm sure that my grandmother never imagined that one of her grandchildren would be standing here today representing the state of Illinois in the United States Senate. Well, that's my story. That's my family story, and it's America's story. Perhaps it's partly because of this family history, but I believe immigration is the defining positive force in America. How can you tell when a country's in decline? When immigrants stop wanting to come to it. Many other developed countries have had this experience. They've watched their economies decline and fail. That's never been the experience in America. Look at our history. In every generation, immigrants have come to our shores from around the world and made us stronger. Immigrants do not take away, they add to society. They're hard-working men and women with courage to leave everything behind and to come and try to build a new and better life for themselves and their children. These immigrants, every succeeding wave of immigrants, every generation of immigrants bring new life to America. But today, our immigration system is broken and doesn't reflect our heritage as a nation of immigrants. There are millions of undocumented immigrants in our country who want to be full-fledged Americans. They have strong family values. They contribute to our economy and take some of the hardest jobs in our nation. But under current law, there's no way for many of them to even get in line to be legalized. We can't turn our backs on the people who are already here in this nation, already yearning to be part, officially, of the American family. They sit next to us in church. Their kids go to school with our kids and grandkids. They're the ones who serve our food at the restaurants, clean up the tables afterwards. They clean our homes. They care for our kids and grandkids, and they care for our elderly parents and grandparents. When I first came to the Senate in 1997, I got a surprise phone call from Ted Kennedy. I was still pinching myself thinking, I'm going to serve in the same place with Ted Kennedy? Well, he said, I have a request for you, Dick. I'd like you to be a member of my immigration subcommittee on Senate Judiciary. He was the chairman, and I accepted his invitation. I sat in that gallery and watched Senator Ted Kennedy and Senator Bobby Kennedy on the floor of the Senate. I was just a student at the time. And I thought, I'm going to have a chance now to sit in the same committee room with this man and speak to the issue of immigration. I didn't think 16 years later I'd be standing here on the floor of the Senate with Senator Kennedy gone, and we'd still be struggling to fix America's broken immigration system. We've been through a lot in that period of time. 12 years ago, I wrote a bill called the DREAM Act. That bill would allow immigrant students who came to the United States as children to earn their citizenship by attending college or serving in the military. I've been fighting to make that the law of the land. I've called it for a vote on the Senate floor. We've received majority votes, but I could never, ever break the filibuster. I could never get the 60 votes I needed. In the last decade, with the leadership of Senator Ted Kennedy and Senator John McCain, we've made serious efforts to pass comprehensive immigration reform legislation, but we have always fallen short. Prior to this particular debate, I can recall sitting in a room right off the Senate floor with another young senator named Barack Obama, working on immigration reform. It's been our challenge. Now the Senate is going to take this issue up again this week. This is the best chance we've had in 25 years to finally get this job done. 6 months ago, I sat down for the first time with 7 other senators, 4 Republicans, 3 other Democrats. On my side of the table, Chuck Schumer, New York, chairman of the Immigration Subcommittee. Senator Bob Menendez, the leader of our Hispanic Democratic Senate caucus. And Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado, who knows this issue firsthand from his state. On the other side of the table, John McCain, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, and Jeff Flake of Arizona. They started calling us the Gang of 8. I've been in so many gangs around here, Mr. President, I think I need to get some tattoos, but I'm not likely to do that. But these gangs are constructive efforts to solve problems. This is a diverse group. Think about sitting across the table from McCain, and Rubio, and Graham, and Flake. There's such Schumer, and Durbin, and Menendez, and Bennett. A lot of differences. But the thing that brought us together was the realization that if we couldn't reach an agreement, neither would the Senate. If we couldn't bridge the differences between Democrats and Republicans, conservatives and others, in our negotiations, the Senate never would. Well, we set out to get the job done. I wasn't sure several times if we were going to be successful. The Republicans had a bottom line. They wanted strong measures to secure our border with Mexico and to prevent future illegal immigration. We had a bottom line on our side of the table, too. A tough but fair path to citizenship offered to 11 million undocumented immigrants. We met for 4 months. We met more than 25 times, long and difficult sessions. A couple of those sessions I thought were the last ones. We wouldn't be back another day. But we returned. We made concessions. Everybody gave a little. And at the end of the day, we reached an agreement. We announced in January our 7 principles, and then we started the hardest part, drafting the actual legislation. By the middle of April, we finally had a bill. 850 pages, if I'm not mistaken. It's here now. I probably ought to take a look and make sure I get the page numbers correct. Well, this version is much longer because it's wider spaced, but it's about 850 pages. We heard testimony in the Senate Judiciary Committee from more than dozens of witnesses, supporters and opponents. Then in May, we sat down for a markup, which is where we actually amend the bill. I've been a member of the Judiciary Committee for 15 years, and I've never been through a markup like that. Senator Pat Leahy of Vermont, President Pro Tem of the Senate, Chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, pledged that he would make this markup open and fair for both sides, and he did. It took us 3 weeks. We met 5 times for a total of 37 hours on this bill. More than 300 amendments were offered. We debated and voted on 212 of them, including 112 by Republicans and 100 by Democrats. 136 amendments or changes were adopted. And all but 3 of those, 136, passed with a bipartisan vote. The spirit of bipartisanship was in this Senate Judiciary Committee, as it was in our meetings leading up to it. Finally came the vote for reporting the bill out of committee. It was one of those historic moments which no senator present will ever forget. When Chairman Leahy announced the 13-5 vote in favor of this measure, the room erupted in applause and cheering. People stood up in their seats and came and embraced one another, realizing we just made history. Let me go through the basics of the bill. First, our bill will secure the border and stop future illegal immigration. The border between the United States today is safer and stronger than it's ever been in 40 years. We have invested billions of dollars. We have doubled the number of federal personnel working on the border, monitoring the coming and going of people across that border every single day. And we've reached a level of competence and security we never dreamed of. And now we are going to do more. We have promised the Republicans at the table we will secure that border with even more technology and more investment. Each year, we spend about $18 billion policing the border between the United States and Mexico. $18 billion. That is more than the combined expenditure for all of the federal law enforcement agencies. FBI, Secret Service, Drug Enforcement Administration, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, U.S. Marshal's Office. We spend more than that each year on the border, and now we will invest even more. So for those who argue that we're not serious about border protection, believe me, we are. The investments will be made with the very best technology, with the advice and cooperation of the states affected by these decisions to make that border as safe as humanly possible. We've made amazing progress. We can do more. The Border Patrol agents, over 20,000 of them at work today, better staffed than any time in the 88-year history of that agency. 651 miles of border fencing out of the 652 mandated by Congress. Now, I was a skeptic when they said they were going to build fences on the border. I really was. My belief was if you built a 10-foot fence, it's an invitation for a 12-foot ladder. And I thought we could easily overcome it. Well, they built fences where they will work, and they put other devices in place where fences won't work. Significant results have been shown. Cities on the southern border are the safest in the country. Violent crimes in the southwest border states have dropped an average of 40% over the last 20 years. And the top 4 big cities in America with the lowest rates of violent crime are all in border states: San Diego, Phoenix, El Paso, Austin. Our bill will do more. We set a clear, tough target for border security. The bill requires the Border Patrol to have 100% persistent surveillance of the southwest border. In other words, the Border Patrol will have to be able to see in real time every single person who crosses that southwest border illegally. We also require a 90% effectiveness rate for southwest border sectors. In other words, the Border Patrol will have to stop 90% of all people who attempt to enter the country illegally in each border sector. It requires the Department of Homeland Security to create a southern border security plan and a southern border fencing strategy within 6 months after the bill is passed. The border security plan will spell out the personnel, infrastructure, and technology necessary to achieve this 90% effectiveness rate. The bill approves $3 billion for this border plan, $1.5 billion more for a fencing strategy. If the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, does not reach 90% effectiveness within 5 years, the Border Commission, made up of southwestern state officials and a bipartisan presidential and congressional appointees, are empowered to order additional steps to secure the border. Our bill appropriates up to $2 billion in additional spending, if necessary, for those measures. Anyone who takes a look at this, and you'll hear during the next 3 weeks, many of the critics will say, well, they're just not serious about the border. Believe me, we are. We have been, we will continue to be. We put the resources on the table with the cooperation of the states bordering Mexico to make sure we have done absolute everything within our human capability to keep that border safe and strong and secure. Of course, improving border security overlooks one very obvious weakness. 40% of the undocumented immigrants in the United States didn't cross the border illegally. They came into the United States legally on visas. Students, visitors, similar visas were given to them, and they overstayed. They were supposed to come to go to college, and they stayed after college. They were supposed to come for a vacation or a family event, and they overstayed their visas. So 40% of the undocumented people overstayed their visas. We addressed that. This bill requires the electronic tracking of people who enter and exit America. We require in this bill that all visas, passports, and other travel documents for immigrants who are entering or exiting the United States be in the form of machine-readable documents which can be scanned as they enter and leave the country, so we'll know who's coming and going. The bill mandates this machine-readable system be interoperable with the databases that are used by federal immigration and law enforcement agencies and the intelligence community. We are trying to integrate all of this information about people coming and going and living in this country to make us safer and make the system work. This gives authorities real-time access to information to connect the dots across law enforcement databases, including the FBI fingerprint check, name check, and the NCIC list. The new machine-readable entry-exit system will access this information when determining whether to issue a visa or deny entry. I say to those observing this debate, when you hear just the two things I've mentioned, you've got to say, this bill, 744, this bill is going to make America safer. The border is going to be stronger. We're going to know who's coming and going in America. And there's more. We also need to address the job magnet that brings illegal, undocumented people into the United States. We need to make it more difficult to hire undocumented people. Our bill does it. We require all employers to use a mandatory electronic employment verification system to verify the employees are legal. Job applicants would have to show identifying documents such as a U.S. passport, driver's license, or biometric work authorization card. And it includes photo identification. The employer in any business in any town across America with access to a computer goes to the E-Verify system, enters the vital information about the person sitting across the table applying for the job, pushes the button, and waits to see if the photo that comes across the computer screen is the same photo as the one that's been presented. There's the verification. The employment contract can go forward. Our bill will reform our legal immigration system to strengthen our economy, our families, and our workers. We need to ensure that families that have been separated for many years can be finally reunited. Employers should be given a chance to hire an immigrant worker when truly needed. But first, and I insisted on this throughout, first, we require that you have to offer the job to an American before you bring in a foreign worker. Our first obligation, whatever state you represent, is to the people we represent, particularly those who are out of work. This bill requires when there is a job opening, before you can offer it to a foreign worker, you must offer it to an American. Maybe they can't fill the job. Maybe they don't have the qualifications. Maybe you need some specialty. Well, then you can go forward under specific conditions here with limitations in hiring that foreign worker. We've been told by the business community, especially high tech, that there's a need for more high-skilled workers in our country. Mr. President, last week I went to the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. There's an incubator there, and in small suites of offices, amazing things are underway. Some of them I can't even explain to you. I'm a liberal arts lawyer, okay? The closest I ever got to real science was political science, and that doesn't count. And I tried to listen and absorb as much as I could about what they were doing at this fabulous institution. Some of the things they're doing there are dramatically reducing the cost of producing biological vaccines and medicines. medicines that are used, for example, in cancer therapy. To cut the cost in half, they're experimenting on new ways to do that. I met a young man named Bo Song from China. The man who was introducing us was from India himself, and he was the head of the project. He said this young man came to the Illinois Institute of Technology and to Chicago to get an advanced degree. He is possibly, he said, the smartest student I've ever had in any class. Straight A's in China, learned English, and came here to learn more. He's working on this project. I got to meet him. He was kind of a shy, friendly in a way, standing off to the side, and they brought him over. And I said to him, well, let me ask you, Mr. Song, would you be interested in staying in the United States and developing this project? He said, if I could, I would. So here was a man brought for an education in the United States who will soon be given a choice to go back to China or to stay in the United States. His preference was to stay here. We require in this bill that if you have an advanced degree in STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and math, an advanced degree, and you have a job offer, that you be offered a green card. A green card is a path to legalization and citizenship. I think that's a smart thing to do. I can recall attending the graduation at the same school just a few years back where it seemed every advanced degree was going to someone from India or South Asia. And I thought to myself, what a sad situation. We are handing them advanced degrees which they earned in the United States at the best schools, and we're handing them a map on how to find their way back to O'Hare and leave. This is a better approach. If there's a job offer, we need to keep this talent in America. It just won't employ that person. It will employ many others who can work for the companies that they're going to help. Employers under our bill will be given a chance to hire temporary foreign workers when they truly need it after they have tried to recruit Americans for the same jobs. We also require that any employer who hires a foreign worker must pay a fee to be set aside for a fund to help train Americans. Let's put the cards on the table here. If you go to the graduation ceremonies at these schools, the best engineering schools in America, you will find a majority of foreign students. That is the reality today. So let's change the reality. Let's take the fees that we will collect when these foreign students trained in the United States are brought here to work, take the fees and create, as we do in this bill, scholarships and college funds for American engineering students. Let's grow our own in this country. Let's make sure we have young people coming out of our high schools and colleges who are prepared to get advanced degrees who are from America. There's nothing wrong with that. That's our first obligation. This bill will do that. In Illinois, more than 40% of the students who earn master's or doctoral degrees in STEM fields are temporary non-immigrants. In 2011, almost 2,700 specialists in advanced fields like computer science, programming, biomedicine, who earned degrees in Illinois, could not obtain visas upon their graduation. 1 year, 2,700 of them. Yet we will need in Illinois alone 320,000 STEM graduates in the next 5 years. It makes no sense. Training them at the best schools in Illinois, knowing we need them in Illinois, and telling them to leave? It makes no sense. Our bill allows employers to sponsor for green card any student who graduates from a U.S. school with advanced degrees in STEM fields. We also have a significant increase in H-1B visas for skilled workers. We have now a limit of about 65,000 H-1B visas a year. It can go up to 115,000 depending on the supply and demand, and even as high as 180,000. For the first time, though, employers will be required to post the job at the Department of Labor website for 30 days before they hire a foreign worker. Going back to the point I made earlier, first offer the job to an American. Under current law, employers are permitted to pay H-1B visa holders substandard wages. We change it. We raise the wages to be paid to these H-1B workers. We don't want to create incentive to bring in low-wage foreign workers. We want a good wage to be offered to an American first. We also take important steps to crack down on the biggest abuse of H-1B visas, outsourcing American jobs. When most people think of H-1B visas, these are visas to bring in professionals, you automatically think of high-tech companies like Microsoft and Google, hiring the engineers they need and paying them top dollar. The reality today is dramatically different. In fiscal year 2012, all of the top 10 H-1B visa applicants were outsourcing firms, foreign firms. These 10 companies used 40% of all the H-1B visas. Under current law, employers can legally use the H-1B visa program for outsourcing. We change it. We phase out this abuse of the H-1B system so that those who will be using the H-1Bs will actually be hiring those employees they need. Now let me say that one of the items in this bill, near and dear to all of us, certainly on our side of the table, was a path to citizenship. The last presidential campaign, one of the candidates on the other side advocated what he called self-deportation. That's a phrase to use. Basically inviting undocumented people to leave. It wouldn't work. It's impractical. And I think it's fundamentally wrong. Instead, we need a fair and firm solution, strengthening our national security and our economy that's true to our heritage as a nation of immigrants. Our legislation creates a tough but fair path to citizenship. Here's what it boils down to. We say to the 11 million people undocumented in America, if you can prove that you were here before December 31st, 2011, you have a chance to step forward. Register with the government. Submit yourself to a background check. If there's a serious criminal problem in your background, you're finished. Leave. You can't become a citizen. But if there's not, you can pay your taxes, pay a fine, live legally in America, work legally in America, and travel and come back into this country. It's a long process. They'll be monitored. They'll be forced to learn English to make sure that they can be part of America and its future, and their children as well. But we do this over a 10-year period of time. What we have today is de facto amnesty. We have 11 million undocumented, and we don't have a law to apply to them, not one that's being enforced on a regular basis. Our law would put, our new law, if passed, will create a level playing field. According to the Center for American Progress, if our bill becomes law, undocumented immigrants will increase their earnings by 15% over 5 years, leading to $832 billion in economic growth and $109 billion in tax revenue. They'll be paying their taxes over the next 10 years. It also will create an estimated 121,000 jobs. So I sit down with workers, particularly union workers in my state, and they say, Senator, what are you doing to us? You're bringing in all these people who will now be competing with us in the workplace. I asked them to stop for a moment and reflect on the following. These undocumented workers are competing with them today. Today. You could find a bricklayer, a plumber, somebody to put on a roof in virtually any major city in America, and many of those folks are undocumented. They're getting paid many times less than a minimum wage, and they're competing with other workers legally here in America. We change all that. They come forward, they identify themselves, and they're bound by the laws of this country. It's going to help them ultimately, but it helps workers in general so that they aren't facing this unfair competitive advantage. I see Senator Cornyn's here, and I want to give him a chance to say a few words, but I want to close by speaking about two things before I do. I mentioned at the beginning that 12 years ago I introduced the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act was a response to a call to my office in Chicago. There was a young girl in the city of Chicago who came to that city from Korea through Brazil. Her mother and father brought her into Chicago with her brother and sister, and they were very poor. Her father wanted to be a minister, to have a church. He never realized that dream, and he stayed at home and prayed for that dream every day. Her mother finally said, somebody has to earn some money. She went to work at a local dry cleaners. Well, the kids were raised in a one-room efficiency with hammocks so that they could sleep and all make get by with what little they had, and it was a pretty desperate circumstance. This young woman, whose name is Teresa Lee, had to basically go to school and look through the wastebasket after lunch to find food to eat that other kids had thrown away. That's how desperate she was. Somewhere along the way, she was invited to be part of something called the Merit Music Program. What a wonderful program. About 10 years ago, a woman in Chicago said, I want to create as my legacy the Merit Music Program, which offers free musical instruments and musical instruction to the students, the poorest students in our public schools. It has worked miracles. 100% of the kids in the Merit Music Program go to college. 100%. Well, Teresa Lee was one of them. Turned out Teresa Lee was an accomplished musical student who learned the piano. They gave her a key finally to the Merit Music Program building because it was warm and she liked to stay there late at night and play the piano. She got so good that they said, you've got to apply to Juilliard School of Music and the Manhattan Conservatory of Music in New York. She got the papers to start to fill them out.
Senator's time has expired.
I asked for 4 additional minutes.
Without objection.
She asked the papers, gave them the papers to fill them out for an application, and it said citizenship and nationality, at which point she turned to her mom and said, what should I put there? And her mom said, I don't know. When we brought you here, you were on a visitor's visa, but we never filed any more papers. Teresa said, what are we going to do? And her mom said, let's call Durbin. So they called my office, and we checked the law, and the law was not very kind to a young person in that circumstance. It said that she had to leave America immediately and stay away for 10 years and apply to come back. She was 17 years old. Didn't make any sense. She didn't do anything wrong. She was brought here as a baby. So I introduced the DREAM Act and said for young people in her circumstance, brought here before the age of 16, who finish high school, no serious criminal issues, and can finish at least 2 years of college or enlist in the military, will give you a chance for citizenship. Well, I've been trying to pass that ever since. These dreamers, which they now call themselves, have started stepping forward and telling their stories. They're in some peril when they do this, but they want America to know who they are. Some of them have some amazing stories to tell. Let me tell you 2 very quickly. This is Alejandro Morales, brought to the United States from Mexico at the age of 7 months, raised in Chicago. His dream was to become a U.S. Marine. He enrolled in the Marine Math and Science Academy in Chicago, excelled in school and the Young Marines program, eventually rose to become the City Corps Staff Commander, the highest-ranking cadet of 11,000 junior ROTC students in Chicago. In a letter he wrote to me, he said, I want to serve and fight to protect my country. I'm an American. I know nothing but the United States. Last week, in a sad, tragic, mean-spirited vote, the House of Representatives passed an amendment to deport dreamers like Alejandro. It is a shameless display of lack of understanding of this fine young man and thousands more just like him who just want to be part of America's future. And losing him would not make us any stronger. Let me introduce you to another dreamer. If I can get this up here. Isaac Carbajal and his mother, Victoria. Isaac, brought to the U.S. from Mexico by his mom when he was 5 years old. They settled in the suburb of Portland, Oregon. He went to high school. A military recruiter told Isaac he could have a promising career in the armed forces. He sought advice from a family friend, Dr. John Braddock. John and his wife Kim had come to think of Isaac as another son. Isaac met the Braddock family shortly after arriving in this country. In a letter to me, John wrote that Isaac loved this country, his country. They both believed the recruiter who told Isaac he could enlist in the military and apply for citizenship 2 years later. In January 2011, when Isaac went to San Diego to enlist in the military, he was immediately arrested, turned over to ICE, and deported to Tijuana the next day. He was dropped off alone in a country he hadn't seen in almost 15 years with no ID and nothing but $18 in his pocket. Now he's barred from returning to the United States for 10 years. He went to enlist in the military. Although it's been almost 2.5 years since he was deported, he still wants to come back and serve in the armed forces of the United States. There are so many stories just like this of these dreamers who who want to make this a better nation. The strongest DREAM Act provisions that have ever been crafted are included in this bill and agreed to on a bipartisan basis. Let's pass this bill. Let's end this debate after a fulsome exchange of ideas and amendments. Let's end this debate with a strong bipartisan vote that says both Republicans and Democrats understand I ask for one additional minute.
Without objection.
That both Republicans and Democrats understand that this nation of immigrants must renew its commitment every generation to our heritage, renew our commitment to those people in our families who had the courage to get up and come to this great nation, face great sacrifice, succeed and build what we call home, the United States of America. Now it's our turn. Let's not only prove that we can do the right thing for them and the heritage of this nation, let us prove that every once in a while this great institution of the United States Senate can actually get some important work done. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Thank you very much. The Republican whip.
Mr. President, we have been working on immigration reform ever since I came to the United States Senate about 10 years ago. I've sponsored legislation, most notably with the former Senator John Kyle in 2005, something we called the Comprehensive Border Security and Immigration Reform Act. But the legislation I've worked on since I've been in the Senate has dealt with virtually every aspect of the issues that immigration touches on, from high-skilled visas and guest worker programs to border security to enhancement of our ports of entry and the staffing at those ports of entry so that legitimate commerce and trade can go back and forth, most notably with Mexico, which shares 1,200 miles of common border with my state of Texas. And as a result of that bilateral trade, 6 million jobs are created in the United States alone. I feel like I've been involved in some of the toughest parts of the immigration debate, and as I joke to my staff and family, I have the scars to prove it. The truth is that this is a new topic in many ways to so many members of the United States Senate because 43 senators have come to this chamber since the last time we debated this topic in 2007. 43 new senators. And while the Senate Judiciary Committee has had the opportunity to vote on this important legislation, the rest of the body has not had a chance to weigh in and offer their contributions, hopefully with an eye toward improving the bill and making it something we can be proud of. When I first read the bill produced by the so-called Gang of Eight, I saw many improvements in our current broken immigration system. For example, the bill, as written by the Gang of Eight and now passed out of the Judiciary Committee, allowed more STEM graduates. That is, graduates from our colleges and universities with math, science, and engineering degrees to gain admission to the country as legal permanent residents and eventually citizens. The bill further, I think, makes some improvements in terms of family unification, bringing families together that are split because of archaic and unworkable provisions in our immigration law. The bill also, I think, helps take an important step toward regaining the public's confidence that the federal government is actually up to writing laws that can be enforced and that will actually work as advertised. And that's where the E-Verify provisions are so important, making sure that employers only hire people who are legally eligible to work in this country. And in that same vein, this bill, as originally written, would provide some enhanced penalties to employers who would game the system by evading legal workers and hiring people who cannot legally work in the United States. All of these provisions enjoy broad bipartisan support. And yet, coming from a border state, as I said, one that shares 1,200 miles of common border with Mexico, through which the overwhelming majority of illegal immigration across our borders occurs, I believe that there are dramatic improvements needed in this bill when it comes to securing America's borders and promoting public safety. And those cannot be disentangled from one another. We know the same border that allows somebody who wants to come into this country to work and have a better life, certainly something we can all understand and empathize with, also permit drug cartels and human traffickers to penetrate our borders and apply their dangerous trade. We also have learned over time that our border, our 2,000-mile southern border, is very diverse. In other words, if you're from California and your view of the border is the San Diego area, where they have double fencing and mounted patrols, in essence, by the Border Patrol, that may well work to control the border in San Diego, but it may not work in Arizona or in Texas. And in fact, we've seen dramatic improvements in Arizona, and two of the members of the Gang of Eight, Senator McCain and Senator Flake, have been very diligent in working on those issues in their state. But I must tell you that coming from the state of Texas, where we have the longest extension of uncontrolled border in the country, there's a lot of work that needs to be done because of this diversity. And that's the spirit in which I intend to offer amendments to help improve border security and public safety. Now, the bill grants permanent legal status to millions of undocumented immigrants, as currently written, without any guarantee of securing the border. Now, how would that possibly be a good idea? In other words, there are many Americans who, in their humanity and out of simple human compassion, understand that the 12 million or 11 million people who are currently here, undocumented or in illegal status, that we're not going to do a massive deportation of those 12 million people. It's just not going to happen. And what they would be willing to do is to accept a legal status for those individuals if they can be assured that the immigration bill that is actually passed will work as is advertised. Those eligible for immediate legalization under the current bill would include those already deported immigrants, as well as people who've been convicted of serious crimes, such as domestic violence, child abuse, and drunk driving. Now, how could that possibly be a good idea? We need to fix those provisions and fix the bill in the process. Meanwhile, unfortunately, this bill also weakens current law with regard to people entering the country legally but failing to leave when their visa is expired. This is a so-called biometric entry-exit system, which has been the law of the land since 1996. And when you wonder why people are skeptical about the federal government's commitment to actually enforce the law as written, Exhibit A is this 1996 requirement for a biometric entry-exit system that's never been implemented. Well, visa overstays account for 40% of illegal immigration. So don't you think we would want to fix that provision of the bill? Yes, we should, and yes, we will if my amendment is adopted. This bill also hides from law enforcement officials certain critical information that's necessary to detect fraud. One of the big problems with the 1986 amnesty that Ronald Reagan signed, based on the premise that there would be enforcement and no need ever to provide another amnesty again, was that this would actually be enforced. But because there was so much fraud associated with it, because of the confidentiality requirements of the law, those same mistakes have been repeated in the underlying bill and needs to be fixed. My amendment, well, something we call the results amendment, because we need not just new promises, we need actual results. My amendment fixes these problems. First, it requires the Department of Homeland Security to gain complete situational awareness and full operational control of the southwestern border, with operational control defined as at least a 90% apprehension rate of illegal border crossers. Ultimately, the goal needs to be not just focused on how many we apprehend, but on deterrence. Law enforcement generally operates when people are deterred from violating the law because they fear being captured and the punishment that goes along with it. So that ultimately needs to be our goal, but it will never happen unless we capture at least 90% of the people who come across and send the message that the American border is now secure. My amendment would also require the use of biometric exit system at all airports and seaports where Customs and Border Protection are currently deployed. And it requires national implementation of E-Verify. Again, that system that will allow employers not to be the police, but to have a simple and easy way to verify that the individuals who present themselves for employment at their place of business are legally qualified to work in the United States. The biggest difference between my amendment and the underlying bill is that my amendment guarantees results, while the Gang of Eight proposal merely promises results. I have to tell you that perhaps with all the confluence of scandals here occurring in Washington, D.C., with the IRS debacle, with Health and Human Services Secretary shaking down and raising money from the very people she regulates, there is a lot of what I would call a confidence deficit in Washington, D.C., particularly given Washington's abysmal record in enforcing our immigration laws. But it's important to distinguish between promises and results. Remember, the federal government has promised to secure our border for the last quarter century. And the trail of broken promises, as I said, goes back to 1986, when Congress passed an amnesty program while assuring voters that they would see results on border security and enforcement. And as everyone knows, we got the amnesty but not the enforcement in 1986, and the underlying bill suffers the same problems. At the very least, we should try to learn from history and not repeat it. And unfortunately, the underlying bill fails to acknowledge those lessons we should have learned about steps we need to take in order to guarantee results rather than make repetitive promises that we ultimately don't keep. So I understand why the American people don't trust Washington. I understand why they dismiss some border security promises as rhetoric. That's why my amendment, the Results Amendment, is so important, and it's essential to accomplishing the goal of bipartisan immigration reform. As I said, right now, Congress and Washington have a major credibility problem. No one believes that we're actually serious about actually securing the borders and stopping the hemorrhaging of humanity across our southern border into the United States, including not just people who want to work, but people who are up to no good, the human traffickers and the drug dealers. I'm afraid the Gang of Eight bill, in its current form, would make this problem worse. And so I believe that the true poison pill would be the failure to take sensible measures by adopting amendments like mine, which are designed to actually solve the problem and guarantee results, rather than ignore this important credibility gap Washington has. As I said, we need not more promises, we need results, and that's what my amendment would provide. Instead of enacting so-called triggers that are just really talking points disguised as policy, it's time for us to adopt real triggers that condition the pathway to citizenship on Washington and the bureaucracy and Congress hand in hand working to make sure the law is enforced as written. Well, the majority leader reportedly, according to Politico, has somehow called my amendment a poison pill. Well, we've heard that kind of language before. This is an effort designed to discourage those who would actually create a workable, results-driven immigration reform system from even offering their ideas. And the irony is the majority leader hasn't even read my amendment because it hasn't been reduced to legislative language yet. So he's prematurely called it a poison pill when, in fact, the true poison pill would be the failure to adopt such a sensible approach that would guarantee results so that when it goes to the House, they can see we're actually serious about delivering an immigration reform bill that functions as advertised and not just another series of hollow promises. Strengthening border security and enhancing interior enforcement are not alternatives to fixing our broken immigration system. They are complements of the kinds of sensible reforms that members of both parties have endorsed. And indeed, the provisions of my amendment actually build on the framework created by the bipartisan Gang of Eight proposal. The difference is, again, that we don't just make the promises. We just don't require the issuance of a plan. We actually require metrics to measure success, and we hold Congress's and the bureaucracy's feet to the fire to make sure that those metrics and those goals are actually achieved. Even as we debate the most controversial issues, we should be doing everything possible to promote the type of legal immigration that benefits our society and our economy as well. And, Madam President, it's with that spirit in mind I will be introducing at a later time my results amendment, and I would encourage my colleagues to take a look at it and to join me in strengthening this underlying bill, making it more likely, not less likely, that we will actually pass a bill that will be taken up by the House of Representatives and eventually be presented to the President for his signature. Madam President, I yield the floor.
The Senator from Alabama.
We just want to express my appreciation to the Senator from Texas. He's a superb member of the Judiciary Committee. He offered amendment to this effect in the committee. I thought it should have passed, and it would have helped with a flawed bill, but it was voted down. I know he's working even harder now, and whatever he proposes will be the kind of legislation that would strengthen this bill. Madam President, I would ask unanimous